Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be adding the ability for, well, inserting components into our entities. Because so far we can register the component, we can create the entity, which adds a new column to the ECS, and then finally we now need to add the actual data in to set the data for those components. That's going to be with this component. Let's head over into entities where we're going to add that in. So we're going to create a new test. And we're going to be adding creating an entity with components. So I'll just call this with component test. All right, well, what the first thing we need to do, we need to create our entities. So let's do entities default. We need to register the components, so it's exactly the same that we have here. And then we're going to start creating the entity. Now we can assume that it's going to do this correctly, and because we have this test right here, so we don't need to do any more tests to make sure that it's adding in proper things for the proper nuns for those components. But notice that we actually want to be able to do this dot patterns here. We dot with component, no semicolon. It's just one line equivalent. We can do with component and then pass in the component. So in this case, let's say we're going to have health and speed. So we want health of maybe 100. And with component speed of maybe I don't know, 15. So if I wanted to do this, now it's going to yell at me right away because create entity, and this is showing that I'm returning just nothing. So I can't do that. So create entity actually has to return something that allows me to then run this with component on it. Well, if I want to have a with component just in here, so pub function with component, and we're going to have a mutable self because we are mutating self with this, then that means this create entity here has to return a mutable self. Now, I want to make sure I'm returning a reference to mutable self, because otherwise I'm going to take ownership of the entities, and that the borrow checker is not going to be very happy about that. So if I do this at the very end, after I insert, I update the components to insert the none, I am then just going to return self here. Oh, and it's not self like that, it's the type. So it's a mutable reference to self with the capital S. Okay, then back down here, with component is now going to take in the actual data that we're looking at. So this is going to be something that impulse any. And we're also going to have to return a mutable reference to self. So right away, we can just return self, and we have to give it the actual name. We don't know what this is, so it's going to be just data, and it impulse any. Okay, perfect. Now, we may have to do a plus static or figure out something here. We're gonna find out really quickly because we have this t any static up here. So we'll get a compile error if it doesn't like our type. Now, with component, what exactly is this doing here? We have no errors anymore, so now let's continue writing our test. After we put these in here, we're going to want to see that they're in here. So we're going to say, I want to assert that entities. So now it's going to be a little bit difficult because we have to, how do I put this? We're going to have that RC and ref cell, and comparing those are not quite as easy as like we have to extract the data out to really do the true comparison. So let's now get our health out, and we'll make sure that it's 100. So our health is equal to, we have entities. We don't have any queries at this point in time, so we just have to reach in and grab it. So entities, components, we're gonna get a reference to type ID. Okay, so we're gonna get that. We're gonna unwrap you. Now that's gonna give us this vector. We also know that it's gonna be like one size, so we're good there. So I actually want to get the first item of this vector, which gives us this option. Now here's the first thing here. It's none before, but now I want it to be something. So again, another unwrap here, because I want to make sure that this is something, and if this is failure, I want to know right away. Now you cannot move out of index. Ooh, so I can't actually do another unwrap at this point in time. I'm gonna have to do this on multiple lines. In fact, I think, we have this reference to a vector right here, and that's fine. But I want to get a reference to what's inside of it. So we can do a reference to position 0, and that gives me a reference to this option, and then I want to do an unwrap here. And see, at this point, it cannot move out of here, because when I do this unwrap, it's trying to move out, and I don't necessarily want to do that fully. So we're just gonna come here. It's gonna give us our maybe like first health. Then I want to now take for this first health. We want to get inside of it. So we're going to unwrap that. So let health equals first health. We're going to unwrap you. Okay, now we get this entire RC ref cell dyne any. Well, so at this point, now I need to actually just like extract and get inside of it to find out if this is the actual data that I'm, expecting to get. Now, to get inside of RC, it's the same as the boxes. We just deref it and we're inside. The ref cell is not quite so simple. We're gonna need to borrow it to then get at the contents. So here's what I mean about this. We're gonna do a let borrowed health is going to be equal to health. And in fact, I'm going to rename this to be a wrapped health, because it's wrapped in this RC ref cell. Okay, so this is going to be the wrapped health. We're going to do dot, which then goes inside the RC to the ref cell, and we're going to borrow. Now, VS Code is trying to be helpful, and it's telling me multiple borrows that I can use here. We have borrow, and then we have this borrow, use standard, borrow, borrow. If you do this one, which then pulls in this, where is it? It pulls into the top somewhere. Oh, it pulls it in right. Where did it put it? Oh, I don't think it actually pulled it in. Okay, perfect. If it pulled it in, if you get that standard borrow coming in, as opposed to using just the method of borrow on the type, then you end up running into trouble. It's actually affected me a few times in the past where I'm not really paying attention. VS Code trying to be helpful and auto does a use statement for you. Could be a little, could cause a problem. Okay, so by borrowing here, we now see that we have this ref dyne any. So ref is very similar to the RC. We can now just dereference it to get access to it. Now the any types do kind of sort of remember what their types were, but only kind of and sort of. What we need to do is downcast it into the appropriate type for us to get access to it. So let's now do health is equal to this borrowed health. We're gonna downcast. I have the choice of downcasting mutably or downcasting to a ref. I just need to downcast to a ref. I do need to tell it what type it's going to be because otherwise it just has no clue. So in this case, we know that it's going to be this health. And then we see that we have this option here. Can I just unwrap you? And now I have access to this health. What are you yelling about? Cannot move out of first health, which is behind a shared reference. So first health. I have a reference here. We have an unwrap for this option. Oh, notice that it's giving me this RC here. Behind a shared reference, move occurs because first health has type option of RC, solid, dyne, standard, any, which does not implement the copy trait. So consider borrowing the options content. Well, I think that's exactly what we want to do here. So I think we can tell our option here to give us a reference inside of here. So actually, this is gonna be like in our query, we're gonna have to handle this. Right here, we're gonna have to do this separately. So we're gonna do probably like an okay or. No, it's not an okay or. It's a, what is it? There's a thing on options that allow us to like get the borrow inside to move inside. You know what would be perfect? Let's just go take a look at the documentation because Rust has good documentation for options here and will allow us to sort of see what we need to see to get out. So here's this core option and we'll just look through here to see if we can find something that allows us to return something inside. So there's this as, oh, look at this. Okay, so pubconst as ref converts a reference to an option to where the reference is inside. That's exactly what we want to do, is the as ref. So as ref like that, and then we can now unwrap. And now we have a reference to the RC here, which is perfectly fine. Okay, then we can, everything else is now working just fine for us. We now have this health. If we can now check and assert that the health is exactly what we think that it is. So we're going to do assert equal that health of .0, which should give us this, is the same as 100. And if we run this, well, we get an error. Well, why did we get the error here? It's we panicked and we called unwrap on a none value on this this line. So if we take a look at that, wrapped health first, the first health. Well, if we look in with component, it's not actually doing anything. So it is a none. Like we don't actually have anything in there yet. So let's go ahead and fix that. So that way it won't fail on us. So with component, we need to figure out which data is like, which of these cells it needs to go into. So first of all, we need to get out of the hash map the appropriate components. Well, we need to get the type ID for that. So type ID is equal to, now this data isn't any, but it knows what the type ID is. So we can do data.type ID, which will give us the type ID. Now we can use this type ID to extract out the vector of components. So that components is going to equal to, now what do we want to do if we try to like insert something and it just doesn't exist? It's a good question, right? Because as soon as I do this, I'm going to have to unwrap or somehow handle this, the component not existing potentially. So we should probably return a result. We have a couple different choices here. We can just like error out completely, which is perfectly fine, and crash, which probably is what we want to do because we were trying to insert a component that hasn't been registered yet. That's probably, yeah, that's probably exactly what we want to do. So I want to come back into our cargo toml. We're going to add in something to help us handle errors. I actually like the error crate. So while Rest Analyzer is pulling in all that, let's go take a look at the error crate and what that looks like. So error is this, error is a crate where it helps you with errors. For us, like what we're gonna first use it with is the bail struct, which, or the bail macro, which I don't know if it's on this front page. No, it doesn't look like it is. Let's go into the documentation for it. Search for bail. Here it is. So this allows us to basically just say, hey, if we have an error, we're just gonna bail, and that essentially returns error for us automatically. We don't need to worry about that whatsoever. All right, looks like this has been pulled in properly for us. So we can now bail. But if we're going to bail, we're gonna have to return a result here. So we're gonna change this around. We're gonna return a result. I'm gonna make sure that we're gonna return an error result as opposed to just the normal result. An error result still handles any type of result, but it only only requires us to put in the data type that we're gonna return if it's successful. Otherwise, it's just gonna be just any error. It's using dynamic dispatch behind the scenes here. So in this case, we're gonna return a mutable reference to self. And we also need to update this to return an OK and self. Now, the rest of this is going to be, well, we have to deal with this. So when we're extracting the components out, well, that means there's a possibility that it won't happen. Let's do an if let sum. If let sum, and then we're going to get the components equals self dot components. We're going to get and a reference to the type ID. Not a double reference, single reference. Okay, so now we see here we have these here, and we can't actually do this, can we? Because we need to make sure that this is going to be mutable. So it's get mute. Okay, so we have a mutable reference to the vector, but if it's a none, so if it's a none here, we're going to want to do this bail. So bail component not registered. Now we don't know what the name of the component is at this time, and unfortunately we never will. We could do like a type ID of that, but that's not really all that helpful. So we're just gonna say maybe not necessarily component not registered, but like attempted to insert component data or insert data for component that wasn't registered. All right, well, it's not yelling at us, but we still need to actually do the thing here. So we have the components. We also know that we're working with the most recent one because we pushed. So all we have to do is get the last item in this vector, and we're going to be updating that. So out of curiosity, is there something in vectors that allows us to just get the last one, or do we have to get like the length -1 and then just access it that way? Let's come back to the documentation and take a look at vec. It's gonna be the main documentation. So for vectors, is there a last? I don't see like a last here. If I search for last in, oh, actually no, here's last mute. Returns a mutable pointer to the last item in the slice, which is going to give us this option here. And then we could just do whatever we want to with it. So that seems to be fine for us. Now, can I safely unwrap this? Because we're already checking that we have the components, and we've created the entity, which gives us a none here. I think that we can. I think that it's going to be a safe, we can do like a safe, just sort of unwrap. But we can also convert this option to a result and then return that with a question mark. Or just like return it through something else. Let's explore like what our options are for this. So if I want to get the last item here, let last component equal to components dot, gonna get last mute. Okay, that gives us this option. So how do we now convert this option to a result so we can just return the error back and have whoever's calling this handle the error? So there's some things here. We can do like an okay or an okay or else. I kind of like okay or. Either way, it doesn't really matter. We see that Rust Analyzer is telling us that it's going to take like some type here. Let's do an okay or else, because this okay or else won't run until like runtime for it. And I won't have to like actually figure this out unless it actually happens. So okay or else, that gives us this result. So it's converting it to a result. We have to now give it an error. So it's a if I type this in here, there's nothing inside of this. So it's just a closure that takes in nothing as the parameters. And then we have to now return an error at this point. We can bail. And we're going to say that this is getting, let's see, last component could not find last component. Now, when it bails, it's also going to give us a stack trace, so it'll let us know exactly what line this comes from. So that's going to be very helpful too. And now I can do a question mark here. Now this question mark returns the result. Is that true? Treat bounds result error port is not satisfied because it needs to report. Oh, okay. So I don't think the bail works for us. I think we need to do like an actual error, and then with a true error for this. I can do a. Is there an error in? I don't think there is an error in here. We can use anyhow to create an actual like true error, or we can just also unwrap this. Is another option here. Now the bail is, I think, gonna like we could panic, but at that point in time we might as well just unwrap here too. Now if we want to take a look at what okay or does for us, if we just do this, it's going to be an error, transforms the option into a result type error, mapping sum v to okay. So I think what we want to do here is recommended to use okay or else, which is lazily evaluate. So don't do that. Let's go back to this okay or else. I'm going to remain this with the bail for right now. But what we're going to want to do is actually create like proper error handling and a proper message. We're going to do that in a future video for this. So we're going to come back and fix this up. So bail, and this is last component could not be found, not loadable. And we're just going to unwrap this just for right now. Type annotations needed. Oh, is it because it's a bail? I need like an actual error. I think I need an actual error here, because I don't think I can just do like a string of like. Actually, I can do a string right now, but it's unhappy with this. As I said, we're gonna have to come back and fix this to make it a real error later. So we're gonna ignore the warning for right this second, but we're going to make the warning go away using proper code later. Okay, so we have our last component here. Now we want to update that. So it's a none right now. We now want it to be a something using this data. So we're going to do a dereferenced last component is now going to be equal to a sum. Now, if you remember, it holds an RC and a ref cell, so I can't just throw the data in. We're going to do an RC new ref cell new, and then throw the data into that. And that's going to be fine. Now everything should be happy. Down here, we do notice that with component is now returning this result. So now for each of these, we're going to have to do this unwrap to handle the results. But that's going to be fine. Now we can get away from using this unwrap and switch to using a question mark for it if from the test we return a result. We're going to use just the result that we have up and super. And we don't need to return anything in it, so it's just going to be this open and close parentheses, which means at the very bottom here we need to return an OK with open and close parentheses. And now we can convert these unwraps to be question marks. Now these here are options. So I'm unwrapping an option, and these are unwrapping a result. So I can't just do a question mark here. We would need to do the same thing, which is this OK or else, if I wanted to question mark that. All right, let's run this test, see how it's going. Oh, and it passes. So we can now see that we get our health out of here. All right, so that is now the ability to add in with component into our entities. Now, let's go ahead and make sure that these are working now, because they're, well, there's some changes here. Like, for example, we need to return a result. This error result here, that will allow us to do question mark for you. And then at the end here, we're going to return an OK. That. Now it's saying no register component or create entity on the world. Well, that makes sense because the world doesn't have this. Let's go into the lib, and we're going to need to add in these functions. So pub function, register component, and create entity. Let's do register component first, and it's going to take in this type. So register component, we know it's going to take this type. We also learned it has to be this type any plus static. We're going to take in a mutable self, but nothing else. And we don't need to return anything. We're just going to, as part of this, call self.entities. Well, we need to store the entities, don't we? Entities. Okay. Then down here, okay, entities dot register component, and we're going to pass in this type. Okay, that's fine there. That'll make that happy. Next is the create entity. So pub function create entity. Now this doesn't take in the T there. It's going to take in pretty much like nothing. It's just going to do a mute self. We're not going to take in any data. I don't think we need to return any result or anything. It's just going to, well, it is going to return. It is going to return the entities, like a mutable reference to the entities. So a mutable reference to entities. So we're going to do a self.entities.create entity and return whatever it returns. And now we don't have any errors anymore. No, we have some warnings, but that's fine. So if we run all of these tests, oh, they're working. Perfect, which means we can now open up our terminal, do a cargo test, run all the tests, and everything is good. Okay, excellent. So now the next part of this is going to be cleaning up. So how are we going to want to clean this up after getting all the tests to work? This is all fine. This is all fine. And here is it. No, because we don't have a warning for this, but we're going to want this to be a real error. So in the next video, we're going to create an actual real error and then set this up to return that. All right, I'll see you in that video. Have a great day. Bye.